You can run from the stage, but not from the truth.
The champagne tasted like broken dreams and my wife's lies. I stood in the corner of the Brighton Arts Foundation's grand ballroom, watching 300 of Boston's cultural elite pretend to care about theater while they really just wanted to be seen. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces I'd known for 15 years, faces that used to smile when they saw me coming. Now they looked through me like I was part of the furniture. My name is Nick Garrison, and I'm the guy who builds the stages where other people get famous. Nick, darling, you look positively miserable, came the honey-coated voice of Tessa Morrison, my wife's assistant. Her red dress screamed for attention almost as loudly as her laugh. Where's Elise? I gestured vaguely toward the stage where my wife stood in her black designer gown, clipboard in hand, directing the setup for tonight's awards ceremony. Elise Garrison, arts director extraordinaire, queen of Boston's theater scene, and, as I was beginning to suspect, world-class actress in her own right. She's in her element, I said, taking another sip of the overpriced champagne, commanding her kingdom. Tessa giggled. Oh, you're so dramatic. Just like Simon says. Simon Braddock, the golden boy of Brighton Theater, with his perfect jawline and his perfectly timed entrances. At 43, he still looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover, all silver-streaked hair and designer stubble, the kind of man who made other men feel inadequate just by existing. Speaking of Simon, I said, where is our leading man tonight? Oh, he's around somewhere, probably getting ready for his big moment. Tessa's eyes sparkled with something that looked suspiciously like a shared secret. You know how he likes to make an entrance. I did know. I'd built enough stages for Simon's entrances over the years. I'd also noticed how many of those entrances seemed to coincide with my wife's sudden need to supervise backstage preparations. The evening dragged on with the usual parade of speeches, thank yous, and self-congratulatory applause. I made small talk with donors, nodded at board members, and tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Something felt off tonight, like the moment before a set piece collapses. Mark Chen, my old drinking buddy, and the only person here who still treated me like a human being, appeared at my elbow with 2 fresh glasses. You look like you're planning someone's funeral, he said, handing me a drink. Just wondering whose, I replied. That's dark, even for you. Mark followed my gaze to where Elise was now standing uncomfortably close to Simon, both of them laughing at something on her phone. Everything okay at home? Before I could answer, the lights dimmed and Judith Greer took the stage. At 61, Judith was theater royalty, a legendary director whose productions had launched careers and broken hearts in equal measure. She was also Elise's mentor and the reason my wife had climbed so high in the arts world. Ladies and gentlemen, Judith's voice carried across the room without a microphone, a trick she'd perfected in 50 years of commanding audiences. Tonight, we honor those who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make magic happen on our stages. My award, the Technical Excellence Award for Outstanding Achievement in Set Design. I'd won it 3 times in the past decade, and tonight was supposed to make it 4. The recognition meant everything in a world where people like me usually remained invisible. This year's recipient has transformed our understanding of what theater can be, Judith continued. Their innovative designs have elevated every production, creating worlds that transport our audiences beyond all the ordinary. I straightened my tie and prepared to walk to the stage. Around me, people were already starting to clap. Please join me in congratulating this year's winner of the Technical Excellence Award. Judith paused, her eyes finding mine across the room. For just a moment, she looked confused, almost apologetic. Simon Braddock. The world stopped. Simon bounded onto the stage with his trademark confidence, arms spread wide as if embracing the entire room. The applause was thunderous. People were on their feet, cheering for the golden boy, who'd apparently added set design to his list of talents. I stood frozen as my wife, walked onto the stage carrying the award that should have been mine. The crystal sculpture caught the lights as she handed it to Simon, leaning in to kiss his cheek. The kiss lasted a heartbeat too long. To the man who truly brings magic to our stage, Elise's voice carried clearly through the sound system. Your vision and creativity inspire us all. Simon took the microphone, his perfect smile never wavering. Thank you, Elise. Thank you all. This award belongs to everyone who believes in the transformative power of art. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. Especially those who understand that sometimes change requires difficult choices. The applause continued, but I was already moving toward the exit. The faces around me blurred together, some sympathetic, others curious, a few openly amused. I'd just been publicly humiliated by my own wife, and half of Boston's cultural elite had witnessed it. In the lobby, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, 3 missed calls from my lawyer, 2 from my brother, and a text from an unknown number. Check the Brighton Theater website, now. I clicked the link and felt my blood turn to ice. There, on the theater's official page, was a press release dated 3 hours ago. Brighton Arts Foundation announces leadership changes. Elise Garrison to step down as arts director. Simon Braddock named interim replacement. My wife hadn't just stolen my award. She'd been planning her exit strategy all along. I was still staring at my phone when Tessa appeared beside me, slightly out of breath. "Nick, there you are. Judith wants to see you. She's in the green room, and she looks—" Tessa paused, searching for the right word. "Upset." I found Judith pacing behind the stage, her usually perfect composure cracked. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "Nick, I'm so sorry. I had no idea until 10 minutes ago. The board called during the ceremony and told me there'd been a change. They said Elise insisted that it was your idea to give the award to Simon." She grabbed my arm. "Tell me that's not true." "It's not true," I said quietly. "Then what the heck is going on?" Before I could answer, we heard voices from the tech booth above us. The sound system was still live, picking up conversations from backstage. Judith and I looked up at the speakers as my wife's voice filled the green room. "I can't believe how easy that was. Did you see his face?" Simon's laugh was like broken glass. "Poor Nick. He actually thought he mattered. He never saw it coming. God, he's so pathetic. Building sets like some kind of glorified carpenter while we're creating art." "What did you tell the board about the transition?" "That he's been struggling with depression, drinking too much, making mistakes. They ate it up. By the time I'm done, no one in this city will hire him." "And us?" "We'll be running this place within 6 months. Judith's getting old, losing her edge. The board knows it's time for fresh leadership." Their voices faded as they moved away from the microphones, but the damage was done. Judith's face had gone white, her hands trembling with rage. "Those bastards," she whispered. "Those absolute bastards." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not just anger, that would have been clean honest. This was something darker, more patient. This was the feeling of a man who'd just discovered that his entire life was a lie. "Judith," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to do me a favor." She nodded, still too shocked to speak. "I need you to remember this conversation. Every word. Because before this is over, I'm going to need witnesses." The next morning, I woke up alone in our king-size bed with the taste of betrayal still bitter in my mouth. Elise's side was cold. She'd never come home. Her phone went straight to voicemail and her car wasn't in the garage. I made coffee and sat in my workshop surrounded by the miniature stage models that had won me awards Elise was now giving away. Each one represented months of work, hundreds of hours of careful planning and construction. They were beautiful, intricate, and apparently worthless. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Murphy's Tavern, 2 p.m., come alone. Che, Judith." Murphy's was the kind of dive bar where theater people went to drink away their failures. Dark wood, darker secrets, and a bartender who'd heard every sob story in the business. I found Judith in a corner booth, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "I didn't sleep," she said without preamble. "I kept thinking about what we heard, about how long this has been going on." "How long do you think?" "Months, maybe longer." She slid a manila folder across the table. "I did some digging. Board meeting minutes, budget reports, personnel reviews. Look at page 3. I opened the folder and found a performance evaluation dated 6 months ago. My name was at the top, but I'd never seen the document before. "Employee shows signs of instability," I read aloud. "Missed deadlines, erratic behavior, possible substance misuse issues. Recommend close monitoring and potential disciplinary action." "Elise wrote that," Judith said. "She's been building a case against you since last spring." I flipped through more pages. Incident reports I'd never filed, complaints from actors I'd never worked with. budget overruns for projects I'd completed under cost. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, all bearing my wife's signature as department head. There's more, Judith continued. Simon's been getting private consulting fees for creative input on productions. Guess who approved those payments? Elise. $50,000 over the past year. For a man who couldn't design his way out of a paper bag? I closed the folder and looked at Judith, really looked at her. The legendary director who'd built careers and broken rules, who'd fought for artists when no one else would. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because I've been where you are, she said quietly. 20 years ago, I had a husband who thought he could erase me to make room for his ambitions. The difference is I saw it coming. What did you do? She smiled, and for a moment I saw the steel that had made her a legend. I burned his world down and built something better from the ashes. That afternoon, I drove to the theater for what I thought would be a routine meeting about the upcoming season. Instead, I found my office cleaned out and a security guard waiting by the door. Sorry, Mr. Garrison, the guard said, looking genuinely apologetic. Orders from the new management. You're not authorized to be in the building. New management? Ms. Garrison and Mr. Braddock. They said you'd been terminated for cause. I stood in the hallway where I'd worked for 15 years, holding a cardboard box containing the few personal items they'd bothered to pack. A coffee mug from my first show, a photo of Elise and me on our wedding day, and a small wooden hammer my father had given me when I told him I wanted to build stages. Nick? I turned to find Tommy Rodriguez, one of the younger stagehands, looking nervous and guilty. Hey, Tommy. Man, I'm sorry about this. It's BS, you know? Everyone knows you're the best designer we've ever had. Thanks. Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he glanced around to make sure we were alone. They're in your old office right now, Simon and your wife, and they're not exactly keeping their voices down. Something in his expression made my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I mean, if someone happened to be in the supply closet next door, they might hear some interesting things. The supply closet shared a wall with my former office. The wall I'd never bothered to soundproof because I'd never had anything to hide. 5 minutes later, I was crouched between boxes of lighting cables and paint cans, listening to my wife and her lover plan my destruction. A board meeting is Thursday, Elise was saying. I'll present the final report on his performance issues, recommend permanent termination. What about severance? Simon asked. What about it? He violated his contract by missing deadlines and going over budget. We don't owe him anything. And the apartment? Joint lease. But I'm the primary income now. My lawyer says we can force a sale, split the equity. He'll have to find somewhere else to live. Somewhere far from here, I hope. Elise laughed. Oh, don't worry about that. By the time I'm done, he won't be able to get a job designing sets for community theater in Omaha. I pulled out my phone and started recording. You're terrible, Simon said, but he was laughing too. Remind me never to cross you. You never could. You're too smart. Unlike my dear husband, who actually believed I married him for love. Why did you marry him? Security, stability. He had a good job, decent prospects, and he worshipped me. It was exactly what I needed while I built my career. I heard the sound of a chair creaking, then Elise's voice became muffled like she was being kissed. But now I don't need security. I need passion. Show me. What followed was 10 minutes of sounds I never wanted to hear again, accompanied by my wife's voice saying things to Simon she'd never said to me. I kept recording, my hands shaking with rage and humiliation. When it was over, I heard them making plans for dinner, for a weekend in the Hamptons, for a future that didn't include me in any capacity. They talked about my replacement, a young designer from New York who'd work for half my salary. They talked about redecorating my office and about the press release announcing Simon's permanent appointment as artistic director. They talked about me like I was already dead. I waited until they left, then slipped out of the supply closet and walked through the theater one last time. The stage where I'd built 100 different worlds, the workshop where I'd spent countless late nights perfecting impossible designs, the lighting booth where I'd first kissed Elise after a particularly successful opening night. All of it was gone now, as thoroughly as if it had never existed. I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, my mind strangely calm. The initial shock had passed, replaced by something colder and more focused. I had evidence now, recordings, documents, a clear picture of their conspiracy. The question was what to do with it. I could go to the police. But what crime had they actually committed? Adultery wasn't illegal, and neither was lying to your husband. I could take it to the board, but Elise had already poisoned them against me. I could hire a lawyer, but that would take months and cost money I didn't have. Or I could do something else entirely. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, looking at the house Elise and I had bought together 7 years ago. The house where we'd planned to raise children, grow old together, build a life worth living. The house that was about to become a battlefield. My phone buzzed, a text from Elise. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." I typed back, "No problem. Take your time." Then I went inside and began planning her destruction. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations, financial reviews, and the kind of administrative warfare that destroys lives, one document at a time. My lawyer, Patricia Wells, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in what she diplomatically called complex marital dissolutions. "The good news," she said, spreading papers across her conference table, "is that you have grounds for divorce based on adultery. The recordings are admissible in Massachusetts. And the bad news? The bad news is that your wife is very good at covering her tracks. She's been moving money into accounts you don't have access to, building a paper trail that makes you look unstable, and she's got the entire arts community believing her version of events." I studied the financial documents Patricia had compiled. Over the past year, Elise had systematically transferred funds from our joint accounts into a personal savings account I'd never known existed. She'd also taken out a credit line against our house without my knowledge. "How much?" I asked. $87,000. Plus, she's been paying Simon's consulting fees from the theater's budget, which means she's essentially been using your work to fund their affair. The irony was perfect. My designs had been subsidizing my own betrayal. "What about the house?" "Tricky. You're both on the mortgage, but she's been making the payments from her separate account for the past 6 months. She could argue that gives her a larger claim to the equity." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "So she gets the money, the house, the job, and the man. What do I get?" "You get the truth," Patricia said. "And in the right hands, the truth can be a very powerful tool." That evening, I met Mark at Murphy's Tavern. The place was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a Red Sox game on the ancient television above the bar. "You look like heck," Mark said when I slid into the booth across from him. "I feel worse than I look." That's saying something. He signaled the bartender for another round. "So what's the plan? And please tell me you have one, because watching you mope around for the past week has been painful." I told him about the recordings, the financial evidence, the systematic campaign Elise had waged against my reputation. Mark listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Jesus," he said when I finished. "She really went scorched earth, didn't she? She's been planning this for months, maybe longer. So what are you going to do about it?" I took a long drink of beer and considered the question. What was I going to do? The old Nick would have taken the high road, filed for divorce quietly, tried to preserve what dignity he could. The old Nick would have believed that good people eventually get what they deserve. But the old Nick was dead. He died in a supply closet, listening to his wife laugh about destroying his life. "I'm going to return the favor," I said finally. Mark raised an eyebrow. Meaning she wants to play games with my reputation? Fine. Let's see how she likes it when the tables are turned." "Nick," Mark's voice carried a warning, "be careful. These people have connections, money, influence. If you go after them and miss, they'll bury you." "They're already trying to bury me," I pointed out. "The difference is, now I have nothing left to lose." Over the next few days, I began my own investigation. I reached out to contacts throughout the theater community, asking casual questions about Elise and Simon's professional relationship. I reviewed old production schedules, looking for patterns in their collaboration. I dug through social media posts, searching for clues about their timeline. What I found was a trail of breadcrumbs leading back almost 2 years. Photos from theater conferences where they appeared together, always standing just a little too close. Hotel receipts from out-of-town productions that showed them staying at the same locations. Credit card records that revealed expensive dinners for two, charged to the theater's entertainment budget. But the smoking tool came from an unexpected source: Tessa Morrison. I found her at a coffee shop near the theater, looking nervous and guilty. When I approached her table, she actually flinched. "Nick, I didn't expect to see you here." "We need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. "I really can't. Elise said I shouldn't." "Elise isn't here," I interrupted. "And from what I hear, she won't be your boss much longer anyway." Tessa's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I mean, the board is asking questions about the budget irregularities, the unauthorized consulting fees, the creative accounting that's been going on for the past year. I was bluffing, but Tessa didn't know that. They're going to want to talk to everyone who had access to the financial records. I just did what Elise told me to do, Tessa said quickly. The invoices, the expense reports, the hotel bookings. She said it was all legitimate theater business. Hotel bookings? Tessa bit her lip, realizing she'd said too much. I shouldn't have mentioned that. Tessa, I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but if there's something you know, something that could help explain what's been happening. She looked around the coffee shop, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. There's a group chat, she whispered. Elise, Simon, some of the other actors and directors, they call it the inner circle. What kind of group chat? They talk about people, make jokes, share gossip. Some of it's pretty mean. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. Elise added me a few months ago, said it was important for me to stay connected with the key players. She showed me her screen and I felt my blood pressure spike. The chat was full of messages mocking everyone from board members to fellow artists. But the cruelest comments were reserved for me. Look at this one from last month, Tessa said, pointing to a message from Elise. Nick actually thinks his little wooden models are art. It's like watching a child play with blocks. Simon had replied, at least children grow up eventually. There were dozens of similar exchanges, each one more vicious than the last. They'd turned my passion, my life's work, into a running joke for their entertainment. Tessa, I said carefully, would you be willing to forward me some of these messages? I can't. Elise would end me. Elise is going to fire you anyway, I said. You know that, right? Once she and Simon consolidate power, they won't need witnesses to their rise. They'll want a clean slate, fresh faces who don't know where the bodies are buried. Tessa stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. If I do this, you have to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll make them pay for what they did to you, and to everyone else they've stepped on. I looked into her eyes and saw the same anger that was burning in my chest. Elise and Simon hadn't just betrayed me. They'd created a toxic environment that poisoned everyone around them. I promise, I said. She forwarded me the entire chat history. That night, I sat in my empty house reading through 2 years of messages that revealed the true nature of the people I'd trusted. They hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been conducting a campaign of psychological warfare against anyone they saw as a threat. Board members were mocked for their age and traditional values. Donors were ridiculed for their lack of artistic sophistication. Fellow artists were dismissed as talentless hacks who didn't deserve their positions. And through it all, Elise and Simon positioned themselves as the enlightened leaders who would save Boston theater from mediocrity. I forwarded the most damaging messages to Patricia, along with the financial records and audio recordings I'd already collected. Then I opened a bottle of wine, a 2015 Bordeaux that Elise had been saving for a special occasion, and began planning her very special surprise. The first blow was struck at the monthly Boston Arts Council meeting held in the stuffy conference room of the Marriott downtown. I'd never attended one of these gatherings before. They were usually Elise's domain, but as a dues-paying member of the council, I had every right to be there. I arrived early and took a seat in the back, watching as the usual suspects filed in. Board members, donors, critics, and arts administrators, the people who controlled the cultural purse strings of the city. Elise entered with Simon at her side, both of them radiating the confidence of people who thought they'd already won. The meeting followed its predictable course. Budget reports, grant applications, updates on various productions. I waited patiently until they reached the final agenda item. New business. Is there any new business to discuss? Asked Margaret Foster, the council's elderly chairwoman. I stood up. I have something to share with the group. Every head in the room turned toward me. Elise's face went white, but Simon just looked annoyed, like I was a minor inconvenience he'd have to deal with. Mr. Garrison, Margaret said, consulting her roster, I don't believe you're on our list of regular attendees. No, ma'am, but I am a member in good standing, and I have information that I believe this council needs to hear. I walked to the front of the room, pulling out my phone as I went. Over the past several weeks, I've been investigating some irregularities at the Brighton Arts Foundation. What I've discovered is a pattern of financial misconduct, ethical violations, and misuse of power that threatens the integrity of our entire community. Now wait just a minute, Simon interrupted, standing up. You can't just come in here and make wild accusations. I'm not making accusations, I said calmly. I'm presenting evidence. I connected my phone to the room's projection system and pulled up the financial records Patricia had compiled. Numbers filled the screen. Unauthorized consulting fees, inflated expense reports, suspicious transfers between accounts. Over the past 18 months, the Brighton Arts Foundation has paid Simon Braddock nearly $60,000 in consulting fees for services that were never properly documented or approved by the board. Murmurs rippled through the room. Board members were pulling out their phones, taking pictures of the screen. Furthermore, I continued, these payments were authorized by Arts Director Elise Garrison without proper oversight or competitive bidding, in violation of the Foundation's own procurement policies. This is ridiculous, Elise said, her voice shaking. Nick, you're clearly upset about your employment situation, but this isn't the place. My employment situation? I turned to face her directly. You mean the situation where you fabricated performance reviews, falsified incident reports, and systematically undermined my reputation to justify firing me? I clicked to the next slide, which showed side-by-side comparisons of the fake documents Elise had created and the real records from my personnel file. These are the performance evaluations my wife submitted to the Brighton board, claiming I was unreliable and incompetent. And these are the actual records of my work. 15 years of on-time, under-budget projects that won multiple awards and generated millions in revenue for the foundation. The room had gone completely silent. Margaret Foster was studying the projected documents with the intensity of a forensic accountant. There's more, I said, clicking to the final slide. But I think the most revealing evidence isn't financial. It's personal. I played a 30-second clip from the group chat, carefully edited to remove the most explicit content while preserving the contemptuous tone. Elise's voice filled the room. These old board members have no vision. They're holding back the future of theater in this city. Simon's reply was equally damaging. Don't worry, once we're in charge, we'll clean house. Starting with the deadweight, the silence that followed was deafening. I could see career calculations happening behind every pair of eyes in the room. Who was safe? Who was vulnerable? Who needed to distance themselves from the scandal before it spread? I'll be submitting a full report to the State Attorney General's office, I concluded, disconnecting my phone and returning to my seat. I thought the council should be aware of the situation before it becomes public. Margaret Foster cleared her throat. I think we need to call an emergency session to discuss this matter. All those in favor? Every hand in the room went up. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, I walked out without looking back. But I could feel Elise's eyes burning into my back, and I could hear Simon's voice raised in angry protest. The second blow landed 3 days later, courtesy of the Boston Globe's arts section. I'd reached out to Jennifer Walsh, the paper's theater critic, with an offer she couldn't refuse. Exclusive access to the documents and recordings that proved one of the city's most prominent arts couples had been conducting a systematic campaign of corruption and misuse. The story ran on the front page of the arts section with the headline, Foundation Shaken. Allegations of financial misconduct rock Brighton Arts. Jennifer had done her homework, interviewing former employees who corroborated my claims about Elise's management style and digging up additional evidence of Simon's inflated consulting contracts. The article painted a picture of two ambitious people who'd used their positions to enrich themselves while destroying anyone who stood in their way. But the most damaging part was the sidebar story, the human cost of ambition, which featured quotes from the group chat messages showing how Elise and Simon had mocked and belittled their colleagues. The reaction was swift and brutal. By noon, the Brighton Arts Foundation had issued a statement announcing that both Elise and Simon were being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. By evening, 3 major donors had announced they were suspending their contributions until the matter was resolved. I was at Murphy's Tavern celebrating with Mark and a few other friends who'd stuck by me when my phone rang. Elise's name appeared on the screen. You bastard, she said without preamble. You absolute bastard. Hello, Elise. Enjoying your leave of absence? You've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my life's work. Your life's work? I laughed. Your life's work was stabbing people in the back and stealing credit for their achievements. I just made sure everyone knew it. The board will see through this. They'll realize you're just a bitter ex-husband trying to get revenge. Will they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're taking the allegations pretty seriously. I heard they've frozen all discretionary spending and called in an independent auditor. There was a long pause. When Elise spoke again, her voice was smaller, more desperate. Nick, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, figure out how to move forward. Move forward? I felt the rage building in my chest again. You mean like how we moved forward when you were sleeping with Simon behind my back? Or like how we moved forward when you stole my award and gave it to your lover? Or maybe like how we moved forward when you tried to destroy my career and reputation? I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You planned every step of it. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught. I hung up and ordered another beer. Around me, my friends were laughing and celebrating, but I felt strangely empty. The first phase of my revenge was complete, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I'd expected. Maybe because I wasn't done yet. The third blow came a week later, at the annual New England Theater Awards ceremony. It was the kind of event where everyone who mattered in regional theater gathered to congratulate themselves and network for future opportunities. I hadn't planned to attend, but Judith Greer convinced me to be her date. You need to be seen, she said. Let people know you're not hiding, that you're proud of what you've done. The ceremony was held at the Boston Opera House, a grand venue that had hosted some of the most important moments in the city's cultural history. As we walked down the red carpet, I could feel the eyes of the crowd on us, some sympathetic, others curious, a few openly hostile. Elise and Simon were there, of course. They'd managed to avoid formal charges, but their careers were in ruins. The Brighton Arts Foundation had quietly forced them both to resign, and word was spreading throughout the industry that they were toxic hires. They sat in the back of the theater, looking like ghosts of their former selves. Elise's designer gown couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, and Simon's trademark confidence had been replaced by the hunted look of a man who knew his reputation would never recover. The ceremony proceeded normally until they reached the Technical Excellence Award, my award, the one that had started this entire war. This year's recipient, the presenter announced, is someone who has shown exceptional dedication to the craft of set design, even in the face of personal and professional challenges. Please join me in congratulating Nick Garrison. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that went on for nearly 2 minutes. I walked to the stage in a daze, accepting the crystal sculpture that should have been mine months ago. Thank you, I said into the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. This award belongs to everyone who believes that truth and integrity still matter in our industry, to those who stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and to those who understand that real art comes from honest work, not from tearing others down. I paused, my eyes finding Elise in the back of the theater. She was crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. Some people think success means climbing over others to reach the top, I continued. But the best stages are built on solid foundations, with room for everyone to shine. That's the kind of theater I want to be part of. That's the kind of community we can build together. The applause was even louder this time. As I walked off the stage, clutching my award, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine happiness. But as I returned to my seat, I caught sight of Simon slipping out of the theater, his phone pressed to his ear. Something about his expression, desperate, calculating, made me uneasy. The war wasn't over yet. The call came at 3 a.m, jerking me out of the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. Nick, thank God you answered. It was Judith, and she sounded terrified. You need to get down to the theater. Now. What's wrong? There's been a fire. The workshop, your old workshop. It's gone. I drove through the empty streets in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived at the Brighton Theater, I found fire trucks, police cars, and news vans surrounding the building. The workshop where I'd spent 15 years of my life was a blackened shell, smoke still rising from the ruins. Fire Chief Martinez met me at the police tape. Mr. Garrison, I'm sorry for your loss. I know this was your workspace. What happened? Still investigating, but it looks like arson. Someone used an accelerant, probably gasoline. The fire was set to burn hot and fast. Any suspects? Martinez exchanged a look with Detective Sarah Kim, who'd been taking notes nearby. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your recent conflicts with the theater's former management. They interviewed me for 2 hours, going over my whereabouts, my relationship with Elise and Simon, the public nature of our dispute. I answered honestly, providing alibis and contact information for witnesses. But even as I cooperated, I knew what they were thinking. The disgruntled ex-employee with a grudge and nothing left to lose. It was Tessa who provided the break in the case. She called me that evening, her voice shaking with fear and guilt. "Nick, I need to tell you something about Simon." "What about him?" "He came to my apartment this morning, before the fire was even out. He wanted to know if I'd talked to the police, if I'd mentioned anything about the group chat or the financial records." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but he scared me, Nick. He was different, angry, desperate. He kept talking about how you'd ruined everything, how someone needed to pay for what had happened." "Did he say anything specific about the fire?" "Not exactly, but he said something weird when he was leaving. He said, if Nick wants to play with fire, maybe he should see what it feels like to get burned." I called Detective Kim immediately and relayed Tessa's information. Within hours, they had Simon in custody for questioning. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage showing him near the theater the night before the fire, receipts for gasoline purchases he couldn't explain, and testimony from Tessa about his threatening behavior. But the smoking tool came from his own phone, which contained internet searches for how to start an untraceable fire and arson investigation techniques. Simon Braddock, the golden boy of Boston theater, was charged with first-degree arson. The arrest made national news. The story had everything: love, betrayal, corruption, and now violent crime. Cable news shows picked up the narrative, painting it as a cautionary tale about ambition and revenge in the arts world. But for me, Simon's arrest was just the beginning of the final act. With Simon in jail and facing serious prison time, Elise found herself completely alone. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed, her co-conspirator behind bars. The woman who'd once commanded the respect of Boston's cultural elite was now a pariah, unable to find work even at the smallest community theaters. I might have felt sorry for her if I hadn't received the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to my apartment by a process server. Inside was a lawsuit filed by Elise's attorney, claiming that I had orchestrated a campaign of harassment and defamation that had destroyed her career and caused her severe emotional distress. She was suing me for $5 million. The lawsuit was clearly frivolous, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. But it was also a declaration of war, a signal that Elise wasn't going to go quietly into exile. I called Patricia Wells and scheduled an emergency meeting. "She doesn't have a case," Tricia said after reviewing the lawsuit. "Everything you did was legal, and you have documentation to prove it. But fighting this is going to cost time and money, and it'll keep the story in the news for months." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you might want to consider a more direct approach." That evening, I drove to the small apartment where Elise was now living, a far cry from the elegant townhouse we'd once shared. I found her in the building's laundry room, folding clothes with the mechanical precision of someone trying to maintain normalcy in the face of complete collapse. She looked up when I entered, and I was shocked by the change in her appearance. The confident, polished woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked fragile and defeated. "Nick," she said quietly, "I wondered when you'd come. We need to talk about the lawsuit." "Do we?" She continued, folding clothes, not meeting my eyes. "I think we've said everything we need to say." "Have we? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still trying to blame me for the consequences of your own choices." "My choices?" She laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my life, Nick. You took everything I worked for and burned it down because your feelings were hurt." "My feelings were hurt?" I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest. "Elise, you cheated on me for 2 years. You stole my work, sabotaged my career, and tried to drive me out of the only profession I've ever loved. And you did it all while pretending to be my loving wife." "I never pretended to love you," she said, finally looking at me directly. "I did love you, in the beginning." "Then why?" "Because love wasn't enough." She sat down heavily on a plastic chair, suddenly looking older than her years. "You were safe, Nick. Stable. Everything I thought I wanted when I was young and scared and trying to build a career in a world that didn't take women seriously. And Simon? Simon was everything you weren't. Dangerous, exciting, ambitious. He made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. So you decided to destroy me to be with him." "I decided to take control of my own life," she said. "I'm sorry you got hurt, but I won't apologize for choosing my own happiness over your comfort." I stared at her, this woman I'd shared 15 years of my life with, and realized that I'd never really known her at all. The Elise I'd fallen in love with had been a performance, a carefully constructed character designed to give her the security she needed while she built her real life. You're right about one thing, I said finally. I did destroy your life, but not because my feelings were hurt. I did it because you're a sociopath who destroys everything she touches, and someone needed to stop you. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Drop the lawsuit, Elise. You've lost enough already. Don't make me take what little you have left. And if I don't? I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. Then you'll discover that I'm much better at this game than you ever imagined. The final confrontation came, appropriately enough, at another gala. The Boston Arts Recovery Fund had organized an emergency fundraiser to help rebuild the Brighton Theater Workshop and support other arts organizations affected by the recent scandals. It was being held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, with all proceeds going to restore what had been lost. I was the guest of honor, the victim turned hero, whose courage in exposing corruption had helped clean up the arts community. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being celebrated for destroying my own wife and her lover, and everyone seemed to think that made me noble. The event was in full swing when Elise arrived. She wasn't on the guest list, of course. Her presence at any arts function was now considered toxic. But she'd apparently talked her way past security because there she was, standing in the ballroom doorway in a dress I recognized from happier times. The crowd noticed her immediately. Conversations stopped, heads turned, and a murmur of recognition rippled through the room. Elise Garrison, the fallen queen of Boston theater, had crashed her own funeral. I was giving a speech when she appeared, thanking the donors and volunteers who were helping rebuild what had been destroyed. From the podium, I could see her making her way through the crowd, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The arts community is built on trust, I was saying. Trust between artists and audiences, between creators and supporters, between colleagues who share a common vision. When that trust is broken, we all suffer. Elise had reached the front of the room now, standing just below the stage. She was close enough that I could see the desperation in her eyes, the wild look of someone who had nothing left to lose. But trust can be rebuilt, I continued, never breaking eye contact with her. It requires honesty, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Liar, Elise said, her voice cutting through the polite applause. You're all liars. The room went silent. Security guards were already moving toward her, but I held up a hand to stop them. Elise, I said into the microphone, I didn't know you were coming. Didn't you? She laughed, the sound sharp and broken. You've orchestrated everything else. Why not this too? I think you've had enough attention for one lifetime. Attention? She stepped closer to the stage, her voice rising. You destroyed my life, Nick. You took everything I worked for and turned it into a joke. And now you're standing up there, playing the victim, letting these people treat you like a hero. I am a victim, I said calmly. The victim of your lies, your betrayal, your systematic campaign to destroy my career and reputation. You were a mediocre set designer married to a woman who was out of your league, Elise shot back. I gave you 15 years of my life, and you repaid me by burning down everything I built. The crowd was mesmerized, watching our marriage dissolve in real time. I could see phones being raised, recording the confrontation for posterity. You're right, I said, and the admission seemed to surprise her. I was mediocre. I was out of your league. I was exactly the kind of man you could manipulate and control while you built your real life with someone else. I stepped down from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at her. But you made one mistake, Elise. You underestimated what a mediocre man could do when he had nothing left to lose. You think you've won? She said, her voice breaking. You think destroying me makes you the better person? I think, I said, pulling out my phone, that you should have dropped the lawsuit when I asked you to. I connected to the room's sound system and played the recording I'd made during our conversation in her apartment. Her voice filled the ballroom. I never pretended to love you. You were safe, Nick, stable. Everything I thought I wanted when I was young and scared. The crowd listened in stunned silence as Elise's own words condemned her. Her admission that she'd never really loved me, that our entire marriage had been a calculated deception, that she felt no remorse for the pain she'd caused. When the recording ended, the ballroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. That was a private conversation, Elise whispered, tears streaming down her face. You had no right I had every right, I said. Just like you had the right to mock me in your group chat, to steal my work, to try to destroy my reputation. The difference is, I'm not hiding behind lies anymore. Security was moving toward her again, but Elise was already backing toward the exit. The crowd parted before her like she was contagious, their faces showing a mixture of pity and disgust. "This isn't over," she said, her voice barely audible. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over for a long time. You just didn't know it yet." She fled then, pushing through the crowd and disappearing into the night. The ballroom erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once about what they'd just witnessed. But I felt strangely calm. The rage that had driven me for months was gone, replaced by something that might have been peace. Mark appeared at my side, shaking his head in amazement. "Jesus, Nick, that was brutal." "It was necessary," I said. "What happens now?" I looked around the ballroom at the faces of people who would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The night Nick Garrison destroyed his cheating wife in front of Boston's entire arts community. The night a mediocre set designer proved that even ordinary people could be extraordinary when pushed too far. Now, I said, I go back to work. 3 weeks later, Elise dropped the lawsuit and left Boston. I heard she'd moved to Seattle, where she was working as an administrative assistant at a small nonprofit. Simon was sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson. The Brighton Theater hired me as their new artistic director, and I spent my first month designing a stage for a production of Othello. The irony wasn't lost on me. I never saw Elise again. But sometimes I thought about her words in that laundry room, about love not being enough, about choosing happiness over comfort. Maybe she was right. Maybe love wasn't enough to sustain a marriage built on deception, but revenge? Revenge was more than enough to destroy one. I kept the Crystal Award from the Technical Excellence ceremony on my desk, a reminder of how far I'd fallen and how high I'd climbed back. Sometimes visitors would ask about it, about the scandal that had made me famous. I always told them the same thing. Some stages are meant to be burned, but if you're smart, you make sure you're not standing on them when they go up in flames.